Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Carol Sakey speaking. Well, I'd like to talk about Jacinda Ardern's happiness indicators, a happiness index that she introduced into New Zealand in 2019. And New Zealand wasn't the only country to do this. This originated from the Kingdom of Bhutan in Himalayas a long time ago, 2008, by the fourth king of the Bhutan Kingdom. Now, and introduced into the UN in 2011, 2012, the UN Assembly adopted the International Happiness Day. And so it goes on. So I see it as actually using that for a mask as to a country's economy, how it's actually doing, because it's replacing, as Ardern said, was to replace the GDP, the gross domestic product of New Zealand, our economy, the measurement of our economy. So saying that, we won't measure our economy, we'll measure the happiness of everyone. And how do you do that? You just cannot measure the happiness of everyone. So these are measures: income earned from production, total spent on final goods and services, less imports. It's simply the measurement of a country's economic health. That's what GDP is. And Forbes reported on the 11th of July 2012 that New Zealand ditches GDP for happiness and well-being. Remember, people, the well-being budget, that's what that was all about. So it was described as New Zealand's happiness indicators. Happiness indicates the government's use of its budgets. So we had the first well-being budget, as Ardern said. This is the first well-being budget. We're the first in the world once again, the guinea pig state, and everyone is watching New Zealand with our well-being budget, our happiness and well-being budget. So they watch on. So citizens, instead of economic health, a policy shift for government spending. GDP becomes under scrutiny as the government planning toward decision makers turn as a shift towards happiness indicators. Now, as I said, the UN had adopted this in the UN Assembly in 2011 from the fourth king of Bhutan. Now, that is a kingdom. It was a kingdom of Buddhism, monasteries, and calm. But since the globalists have taken over, it's one of poverty, it's one of crime, it's one of economic crisis. Nothing like it was before. And this is what it's done. And it's taken Bhutan, the kingdom of Bhutan, from top of the index in 2008 and 2011 to number 94 on the list now. It's in a pretty bad way. And there's a lot of history to Bhutan about the millions of refugees that came from Bhutan because of how corrupt the royalty was then. So what they did in 2008, they changed their monarchy to a parliamentary system to fit in with the UN global agenda. And that's what happened. So with COVID-19, this happiness indicators index is still going on. And New Zealand's number 10 on the world list as being the happiest in the world. You think what's been going on in New Zealand over the last few years, what load of bullcrap. What's been going on in the world to even measure that, to me, is just a matter of corruption and hiding what is truly happening. So let's get down to this a bit more. So we're talking about GDP. That's divided by the population to assess what the GDP per capita is, per person is. So, as I say, Ardern introduced the first wellbeing budget, and she introduced an increase of 200 million in services aimed at victims of domestic violence, housing programs for homeless population, new decision-making policies as described as progressive, one that no other country had. And Ardern was leading the way, just as she led the way, as she boasted to the Gates gathering of the WEF shapers. And she said New Zealand's the first one to introduce Agenda 2030 into domestic policy, therefore making it binding. And that's what she did. So, New Zealand government unveiling its new economic framework on happiness and well-being. Decision-making policies explain to New Zealanders the basis behind the government shift from GDP to the happiness indicators or index. And how was she going to do this? She said there would be 5 priorities, and they were 1, improving mental health, 2, reducing child poverty, 3, addressing inequalities faced by Indigenous Maori, 4, thriving in a digital era, 5, transitioning to a low-emission sustainable economy, Agenda 2030. It was reported that business would gain 2.1 trillion by embracing the low-carbon tech. So going on to Max Harris's book, 2017, The New Zealand Project, it includes the text that reads, New Zealand, an ideal nation to lead a change in global views. New Zealand, always the leader, the socialist leftist state. New Zealand wants to be the rock star of all global economies by embracing their happiness indicators in the government's happiness index. Forbes reported in 2019 that New Zealand has always been at the forefront of change throughout the ages and continues to be so in their pioneering happiness index and their first wellbeing budget. So, as I said, New Zealand was not the first to introduce this. It was the Kingdom of Bhutan in Himalaya. And this was at that time, 2008, it was called the distinctive known as the Buddhist middle way, where happiness is accrued from a balancing act rather than an extreme approach. The term concept of gross national happiness was the concept that was used by the king, the 4th king of Bhutan, in 1972. As being described as more important than GDP, this concept was adopted into UN Agenda 2030, Global Development Goals, UN Assembly 2011, under Resolution 65309. So the fundamental human goal, it was called. So Bhutan's Prime Minister in 2012 and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon convened a high-level meeting focusing on well-being and happiness to define a new economic paradigm, spreading Bhutan's philosophy. Hence, the first happiness report was issued. In 2012, the UN declared 20th of March International Happiness Day, Resolution 66/28. A collective goal of happiness for UN nation state governments around decision policies. Hence, you had Ardern with her 5 priorities, and New Zealand Herald, they said, like, what has happened to the billions set aside to improve mental health? Because one of those was improving mental health, advancing mental health. What happened? when people were waiting 70 days to see a therapist, men struggling with depression, people with chronic conditions struggling to receive diagnosis and care. It was called robbing Peter to pay Paul. So Stats New Zealand 2021 show that mental health and wellbeing had declined since 2018. COVID-19 study as the government's highly restrictive strategy on New Zealand population caused unprecedented disruption to daily life that caused much more depression, anxiety and stress. Improving mental health, Ardern's new happiness indicators improve. What do they improve? Even more mental health problems. That's what's happened. Increased mental health problems that are not being fixed, where people have to wait ages. That was number one priority on her list in this happiness indicators. Number two was child poverty. 16th of May 2022, government needs to step up to address child poverty ahead of the 22 Wellbeing Budget. 29th of March 2011, income support changes fall short of struggling households' needs. 21st of February 2022, families need cash, not food banks, poverty advocate warns. 22nd of the 10th, 2021, government hardship announces ignores children with the greatest needs. 25th of March 2021, government housing package ignores elephant in the room. 23rd of February 2021, shocking, disappointed, children, families out of on poverty. Ardern's happiness indicators, what a miserable failure. All these families were getting more and more into poverty, going to food banks. Never mind whether you were whether you're so-called Indigenous, whether your ancestry were married, Chinese, English, whatever it was, cultures from all nations ending up at food banks. So that was her indicators for happiness. Number three priority, addressing inequalities faced by Indigenous Maori. Firstly, the term Indigenous didn't come to New Zealand until early 1970 when George Manuel, the president, the founder of the UN, Indigenous Council, International Council, came to New Zealand. He was the president of the Canadian Indian Brotherhood, and he came with delegates here and spoke to Maori iwi personnel, and hence Indigenous was born, because Manuel had actually adopted that from Pakapuni from northern Tanzania, who had been in Parliament there, then left Parliament, become a radical activist, and that's where it came from. So addressing that's Manuel. That was not in the Treaty of Waitangi. They would like you to think it was. The happiness indicators, justification for race-based public health care, a race-based health authority, hospital waiting list, because if you were not of a race that had a Maori ancestry, then you get in behind. And this is what's happening. Race-based health in New Zealand. Pharmacy initiatives only accessible to Maori and Pacifica. Race-based taxpayer-funded freebies, Prezi cards for Maori pregnant women, dividing healthcare up to race, bloodlines, the wasting of billions of taxpayer-funded money. Was everyone happy about that? Silence is golden, I'm sure. What all citizens of New Zealand have this New Zealand citizens should all have the same opportunity, fair and justified. One system for all. No one left behind. This is bullshit. They are using the left behind as a political corruption. So, what do the happiness indicators do there? There's been a lot of unhappy people and a lot of people who should have been on the seeing, actually, specialists in hospital that are now dying. Number 4, thriving in the digital age. Number 4, happiness indicator. Wellbeing Budget. New Zealand Economic Health Brief reports New Zealand falls behind on digital economic performance, and let's face it, heaps of cyber attacks on government departments, 56 for cyber security, 62 for high-tech exports, 69 on manufacturing. Cyber attacks being a huge key concern highlighted in the 2021 report. 8,831 incidents were reported to CRT New Zealand, a 13% increase on 2020, included financial losses combined to a total of 16.8 million. So, and then all that, the data from the coroner's office actually being cyber attacked. Oh, that's strange, isn't it? New Zealand's ransomware. Ministry of Justice and Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand were amongst them have been impacted by cyber attack. There you are, happy about that your private information be well in the hands of crims across the world. The silence is deafening. And Ardern failed. Oh, the government failed us. Every one of them failed us miserably because they're still using these happiness indicators. Happiness indicator number 5, transitioning to a low emission sustainable economy. More of the global shite. Shaping New Zealand's low emissions future. Been running since 2013. The ETS, Emissions Trading Scheme, Government Emission Reductions Opportunities, Policies and Actions, 2015 Household Climate Action Tool of New Zealand, Low Emissions Future, originated by Motu New Zealand, receiving funding from Aotearoa Foundation, established by Julian Robertson, co-funded from Meridian Energy, Z Energy, Minister of Environment, and the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment, helping the electricity industry. Damn the coal and damn Marsden. Let's just bring in the most ever dirty, filthy coal from Indonesia in 2021. 1.6 million tonnes of it. Carbon emissions, my foot. So the Low Emissions Future project is supported by the advisory board, bringing perspectives from government, private sector, academia who do the research for the government, NGOs from New Zealand and abroad. Motu New Zealand is split into 2 separate organisations. Economic and Public Policy is a charitable trust. Gets its funds from various organisations, including government departments and private companies. Well, how about that? The first funding for the injection of the government's journalist fund, the 55 million, was through Motu. Motu to upskill journalists for the government's interest journalist fund. Greenpeace report. Carbon offsets are a scam. 10th of November 2021, a scammer's dream scheme, a bookkeeping trick. CO2 too difficult to predict, greenwashing. It's a mirage of every imaginations. Purchasing carbon offsets does not reduce your carbon footprint. New Zealand, 2016, the Morgan Report. New Zealand, the biggest climate cheats in the whole damn world, when other governments knew that Ukraine and Russia were selling these fraudulent climate units. They backed away, but New Zealand government stayed. They stayed for a few years and they didn't know what to do. Oh no, what did they do? They used them and they gave some away for free so companies could put them in the bank and save them for a rainy day because they were so cheap, and then they could sell them on. This was a huge scam. So our party and National, behind closed doors, decided, oh, what are we going to do? Oh, we keep on using them. Oh, we could use them for our carbon emissions target, the Paris Agreement, and that. Until 2016, when the Morgan Report came out, then Labour and Greens decided to open their damn mouths because they'd all been found out. They're all as guilty as hell. They all knew about it. Now, you tell me about carbon credits when they say they're not worth anything because they're fraudulent, but they're worth something if you get them by other sources. Come on, people. This is a scam. So there was 2 Morgan reports, and you can find them online. So they proved the Morgan report includes the evidence of New Zealand being the biggest climate cheats in the world, buying fraudulent credit to meet international emissions reduction targets. And the last report was called, there's 2 of them, number 2 is called The Dirty Dozen Businesses. Yeah, and all of Parliament were aware of that. But they nearly shit their pants, Labour and Greens, when they were found out in 2016. So Ardern's indicators transition to low emissions, shaping New Zealand's lowest emission future. A government socialist-funded leftist propaganda machine, funding journalists $55 to keep them happy. Happiness indicators. Self-serving corporate leaders enriching themselves and shareholders through government policy making, shareholder profits, and they say they care about you. No way, because what they're doing, they're bought in stakeholder capitalism, and it's been talked about plenty. You can find it through Beehive anywhere. Stakeholder capitalism to replace the free market economy. Free market, free to choose, free to choose what you consume, what you eat, what service you want. Lots of innovation for small businesses to grow and to give other people jobs. For farmers to employ farmhands. It's all happening. Country was going so well on free market economy. No, because Klaus Schwab's baby of 2010, the Global Redesign 604-page report, the Great Reset. And this was it. Replace the world's economy. To do that, you have to re-engineer the way people behave, what they consume, what they eat, so that you can bring all these large corporates in to partner with governments. And it's called PPP, private-public partnership. Let's add another P for wealthy freaking profits. So more power to the corporates and more power to the government over you. And this is what it's about. And actually, it's called degrowth communism, because that's what they're doing. They are degrowthing You will own nothing and you will be happy. That's the communist degrowth. So, flavour of the day, ESGs, a bookkeeping trick. Incentivizing, ensuring a focus on long-term value with the right metrics, prioritizing shareholder interests, metric-based monitoring, and it goes on for stakeholders, stakeholder sensitives, stakeholder initiatives, for shareholder profits. Just think BlackRock Asset Management partnering with the government. This is what this is all about. The Great Reset, the 2010 Klaus Schwab Global Redesign Initiative, and Ardern's Happiness Index to replace the GDP in New Zealand. Instead of measuring economic growth, we will measure happiness, which is impossible. It's absolutely possible. It's dreaming, it's fairyland, and out of this fairyland, she left us with a freaking nightmare. And you know what? And still they're using happiness indicators. And none of them talk about it. And they're still doing it. So, happiness indicators to replace New Zealand's economic wealth for happiness, well-being, fantasy land, the fairy tales that are becoming a nightmare for New Zealanders. UNWEF, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Dear me. UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network in partnership with Ernesto Illy Foundation, the low ranking of Bhutan in the report affirmed the point that behind the veil of GHB, gross national happiness, Bhutan faces serious social problems. Its low ranking highlighted discrepancies in the third gross net happiness survey carried out in 2015. They said that in 2015 this was happening. 2019 gave a really bad report, horrible report, very corrupt in Bhutan, and a lot of unemployment, crime, poverty. And then you've got the history of all the Bhutanese refugees who'd had nowhere to live. They were thrown out the country. And none of this is talked about. And yet, this is what took UN UN Assembly in 2011 and 2012 to actually, for every UN nation in the world, to use this as a measurement for their economy, the happiness indicators. We should take a look at Bhutan. What happened to them? Wake up, New Zealand.